Widespread flooding has caused unimaginable destruction across WA's Kimberley region, with many remote communities cut off from food and medical supplies. Critical infrastructure has also been damaged, making it even more challenging to reach these isolated communities.
Well, Mark Anderson is the CEO of Foundation for Indigenous Sustainable Health, and he was among the few who were able to get to ground zero to check out the situation there. Well, Mark joins us now from Broome. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Morning, everyone. How are you?
So, Mark, I have read that the infrastructure, and as Joe just mentioned there, has been so badly damaged that there's literally an area that's become an island. And I think you were able to film some of this, and we are looking at some of this vision right now. You were also able to narrate as to what you saw there. Let's have a listen to what you saw.
Straight in front of me, over to where those people are fishing on the other side, is where the old crossing used to be. I reckon 6, 7, 8, 10 metres below me, you can see the remnants of the concrete of the old crossing just beyond that fallen tree.
Goodness, it looks terrible there, Mark. I can't imagine what it's like living through it at all. What is your assessment of what the situation is like now?
Yeah, so that footage was actually sent to me this morning by my mate yesterday, and that was actually taken yesterday. The significance of that footage is actually showing the road that the government were thinking was being able to be used while the bridge was fixed, but that road doesn't exist anymore. That was the old Fitzroy Crossing road. It just doesn't exist. It's not there anymore. So the challenge is how to actually get into the town. The only way to get into the town is to fly in. You can actually boat stuff through to Derby by the barges, and then from the barges you can truck it in. But the road between Broome and Woollare, we flew over that not yesterday, but the morning before that, and that road doesn't exist anymore. There's like kilometres and kilometres and kilometres where the Great Northern Highway, which is the main access, is actually just been washed away. There's just nothing there.
As you mentioned just then too, that the only way you can actually reach these communities and these areas is to fly in, and you were able to witness a major drop of much needed supplies of food and medicine to the area. Do you know if these have been distributed to communities that have been affected?
Look, the challenge that we've got is we've got 50 pallets sitting in Broome. You can only get a small amount in. We're dealing with the non-essential, with critical non-food items. But the biggest hassle is, the most important thing is getting food in first, then medical. You can see the C-27 behind me here at the Broome Airport. That delivered an ambulance yesterday. So it's the real juggle between food and your critical supplies and also your critical non-essentials. We've got people sleeping on the floor in Fitzroy Crossing, and we still can't get the mattresses and the bedding and everything that we've got sitting just down the road here. We actually can't get that in at the moment because there's restricted limits to what we can fly in, because there's limited aircraft going in and out of a very small airport in Fitzroy.
You know, Mark, sometimes these floods and these natural disasters become mere headlines. For those of us who are living far away from this, we forget that there are real human stories behind these headlines as well. You are, of course, on the ground there, and you're very familiar with these particular stories. You met Scott Wilson, I believe, and he told you his story of living through the flood and how his family is coping.
Yeah, Scott's actually working with us in Broome. His family actually live out at Mullaga Community, which is 30 kilometres from Fitzroy Crossing. Mullaga Community, that whole community went underwater. They've got a lot of double-storey kind of buildings that sit up high to deal with floodwaters when they do come. They've never seen a flood like this. So pretty much everything on the ground was just covered in mud and water, and then the water was just lapping the kind of floorboards of the second stories. And yesterday the Mullaga community were actually flown back in for the first time, and now it's really looking at how to manage that. You've got other communities like Bungaree, Brower, etc., that all their buildings were inundated with water, and the Bungaree mob haven't even been able to get in to actually look at the damage that has been done. We've shared a video where where Daryl Minger actually talks about how within an hour his kids woke him up, and he said, thank goodness that it was in the morning, and by the time the kids woke him up where the water was at his ankles, it was up to kind of his knee high and then his hips, and they had to rush to high ground. And he was commenting, he was quite scared and traumatised, because he said what happened if that had come in the night and they weren't able to be awake and kind of get action to get out.
Mark, are you surprised that this is happening in Australia, that this level of devastation has happened in Australia, and the slow response as well?
I think, am I surprised? I think scientists have been telling us for years about climate change. They're saying if we don't do something about it, we're going to start suffering the impacts. And I saw the news report just before this one. We've got major fires in the southwest of Western Australia. Up here in the north, we've got the worst flood Western Australia's ever faced. Is climate change real? Well, I think the Earth and the weather's telling us that it is, and the scientists have been telling us for decades, that if we don't do something, then we're going to start suffer the consequences. In terms of the quick response, the challenge that you face up here is distances, access in and out. We had the low actually move from Fitzroy Crossing over Broome, and we had 4 days where the airport was closed in Broome. So, and all these aircraft behind me couldn't actually land in Broome because the low sat right over Broome. So it took 4 days before we could even get the resources in, before we could even then start to set up the response. So the Army and the government and DFS have worked very hard in very difficult circumstances. Yet you then had the only way into Fitzroy was through the airstrip, and the airstrip was covered in water for a good while, and then you couldn't even land the C-27s, which are the Spartans, one of them sitting behind me, because they couldn't take the weight because the airstrip was waterlogged. So there's a lot of logistical challenges, and the distances up here, you're talking 400 kilometres to actually get into Fitzroy from Broome. And when you've got an inland ocean that's about 200 kilometres wide that you've got to traverse to get in, it makes things really challenging from a logistical perspective.
I'm certainly sure that it would. Mark, it is good talking to you. Thank you so much for giving us a picture of what's really happening there and the challenges that you and the community face there as well. Mark Anderson there, CEO of Foundation for Indigenous Sustainable Health.
No problem. Thank you for this morning.